Hi, Lou Pulsfer here to give you brief examples of how you can play test a modification to a game and what you can do with the results. So I'm talking certainly in the first case of late stage play testing. At some point you're going to feel that your game is mostly done. Now that doesn't mean it's going to be mostly done, but you'll think so at that point, because a lot of times in game design you think you're done and then you find out somebody makes a really good suggestion, or a publisher makes a suggestion, or a publisher requires something to be changed. So you weren't done. But even when you think you're mostly done, ideas for modifications are going to come up. Maybe some of your playtesters, maybe people who playtest the game a lot, wish something were a little different. Well, then you can try such things in the late playtesting. The point is not to make the game good, it's to make the game slightly better now. The game is good already. So you could say this is the last few percentage points of improvements. But many of those possibilities will be rejected if the game works well. And I'm talking about changing one thing and playtesting it, not changing several things and playtesting it. Because just like scientific experiments, which is what essentially you're doing, you want to isolate the difference that one change makes, which you can't always do in one game, of course. Sometimes you can. So here's an example. I have a screwage type pirate game, not a highly strategic game, one where players can mess with the others, although in this particular game they're mostly building their own stories of piracy as they go along. It's a combination of historical pirates, which means it's kind of tough to succeed, and fantasy pirates such as the Pirates of the Caribbean films. So much of the action in the game revolves around encounters with ships at sea. There are dice rolls for pursuit or for fleeing if the pirate is fleeing a warship. There's dice rolls for cannon fire. There's dice rolls for boarding. Lots of dice rolls altogether. It's more about the story than the strategy, but some people get frustrated with chance. So, late in development I said, we'll let the players trade in some of their loot for luck tokens. And they can cough up a luck token to re-roll a die, but only once per event. You can't keep re-rolling. So we tried it. And this was with experienced players. Well, for the first two games, nobody did it. Nobody used them. Loot is pretty valuable in the game. A good score is getting into double figures. Sometimes a winner won't get to 20. So turning in loot for luck tokens is a difficult decision, as things are supposed to be in games. In the third game, the player who most got frustrated with luck did use them. Now, what's the result? Well, these players are accustomed to playing a game as it stood. What would other players think who had never played it before? I don't know yet, because I haven't been able to try it yet with other players. So right now I think of it as an optional rule, not a standard rule. Many optional rules begin life as something that you try and some people like, but it's a minority rather than a majority segment of the players. So it becomes an optional rule for those groups where that particular kind of player is common. Now, optional rules used to be very common 30 years ago. Nowadays, not so much, because some people have got the notion that there can only be one way to play a game, although many of those people will then buy an expansion that changes how the game is played, but it's official, so it's okay. It's an odd thing. I like to put in optional rules. Now, here's another example that was perhaps more fundamental to the game, and the change took place a little bit earlier on. It's a 2 to 6 player space war game, more or less. All cards. Players get points for destroying opponent worlds or systems, as well as for holding systems, and the points are only scored at the end of the game. For much of the game's life, I gave double points for held systems over destroyed systems. But I realized as time went on that tended to focus players on defense, and I wanted a more free-flowing offensive game. There are reasons for that, having to do with the story behind the game. So I tried giving equal points for holding and for destroying. But that made the game too offensively minded for my taste, even when I required that you hold at least one system at the end of the game in order to score any points. So I tried 1 point more per held system than per destroyed system. And this is another game where the winning score is 17, 20, 25, something like that. And that seemed to me to be the right balance. However, I've included the other two possibilities in the rules as optional rules for those who like to play more defensively or more offensively. So I can satisfy minority segments, but I've picked what I think is the best possibility overall. So don't waste ideas when you can make them optional rules that satisfy a minority segment of players, because different player groups play differently.